What is life like in Israel after 7th of October?
Radical Islamic regime in Iran. They're funding the Houthis, they're funding Hamas, they're funding Hezbollah. One of the missiles hit less than a mile from my house, and we heard it and we felt it. And that was scary.
They love death more than we love life. Would you not say?
Absolutely. From the river to the sea means no more Jews in Israel.
It's not a repressive security. You don't feel like when you get to Israel, someone is walking behind your back, as you may do, I imagine, if you go to North Korea, for example.
We've even had a Supreme Court justice that was Arab. The head of the largest bank in Israel, Arab. Members of the IDF, Arab. One father, who happened to also be a paramedic, got to the field, saw his child murdered, and immediately began performing CPR on other kids and trying to aid them because he knew that he had lost his child. These were not Jews. These were Druze, Arab Druze kids who were killed by Hezbollah, who was funded by Iran, which lunatics around this city, London, all around the world are marching in support of.
Always be wary of people that run away from a debate and want to shut down the debate.
We weren't going to get the BBC to show up, right?
Well,
I could have sent a limo for them and they weren't going to come. They don't care about the truth.
we're really facing a very powerful enemy, an enemy that is very ideologically motivated, loves death more than life, is well-funded.
There is a reason that the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt, and even Russia have declared the Muslim Brotherhood a foreign terrorist organization. Perhaps other countries need to designate the Muslim Brotherhood a foreign terrorist organization. They're looking to create their caliphate.
Welcome to another episode of You Decide. Today I have the pleasure of talking to Eric Rubin. How would I introduce you, Eric? An American-Israeli and pro-Israeli advocate.
Israeli advocate and committed to fighting, anti-Semitism, racism, and all forms of intolerance.
Yes. And I was lucky to have you because you've been in London since last week.
Yeah, I've been here for a week.
For a few days. And then we can talk about a variety of projects that you're involved with, and also about, because you made Aliyah to Israel on just after October the 7th, yeah?
Yes, actually, my wife and I got on a plane October 12th, arrived in Israel on October 13th, and made Aliyah. We were supposed to make Aliyah October 31st, but because of the war and what our friends and people in Israel were going through, we decided to, move up the date. It's interesting, around the world, the diaspora community loves to say, thank God for Israel and thank God for the IDF. There'll never be another Holocaust. But what about when Israel needs us, right? It can't be a one-way street. So it was really important to my wife and I to get on a plane. It was difficult. Some of the family wasn't happy about us going 5 days after the war started.
I can imagine, yeah.
But you know what? There's times you have to stand for the right thing. And also, you don't run away from your family when they need you. You run to your family. And that's how I feel about our friends and people in Israel. They're our family.
Well, that's a good thing to start with, actually, because after 7th of October, things changed. I mean, if you'd moved in there before, things were a lot calmer, life was a lot more normal. And we often hear about what's happening in Gaza, in Lebanon, and, but what's happening in Israel? What is life like in Israel after 7th of October?
I think the best word I use to describe it is a dichotomy, right? Because there's really two totally different things that are going on right now. Let's focus first on the positive. We wake up every single day determined to live the happiest, best days we can. So, we'll go for a walk on the beach. We go visit friends. We do Shabbat. We work. We go to the coffee shops. We walk our dogs. And we're trying to maintain a normal life as much as possible. And I think if you saw, there was some recent statistics that still said Israel is one of the top 10 happiest countries in the world despite the war.
Yes, I saw that, and I was really surprised. Well, I was surprised in a way, but not surprised in another way, because I've been to Israel myself, and it really was a happy community, yeah.
Right. I mean, and if you understand Israelis, that's what we're all about. I mean, this war was forced upon us. But on the other hand, while we try to do all that, there are still 59 hostages being held by Hamas. We are still facing rocket fire. The other day, rockets came from Hamas into Ashkelon, despite them saying they have no fuel, right? And people were injured.
They claim they run out of fuel and food, but they never run out of rockets for some reason.
They never run out of rockets, and you've seen some of the pictures. For people that haven't eaten in so long, they have to be the heaviest people I've ever seen in my entire life, right?
Yes,
and
yeah.
by the way, also, everybody's a reporter there, right? Everybody's a reporter, a woman, or a child. So it's hard because, and not only do we have Hamas and their rockets, but we have the Houthis. And the Houthis have decided, again, if you go back to it, it all originates with the, radical Islamic regime in Iran. They're funding the Houthis. They're funding Hamas. They're funding Hezbollah. So, it's with heavy hearts, hostages are still there until the remaining 59 hostages come home. It's difficult for us to really enjoy our lives. And I think that once those hostages come home, we'll move up even higher in the happiness rankings.
So let's just talk about rockets, because, I mean, most of my audience here, they're based in UK. We've got no idea what it's like to face a rocket on a daily basis. We just go on about our normal life. We might moan about the tubes being overcrowded or something, but luckily we don't face rockets. What happens when a rocket is fired?
So kind of two things. First of all, the sirens go off in your area. So imagine on your telephone poles here or light poles that there are sirens. And we get a notification. Now, we also all have apps. There's different apps that we use, and the app will go off as well. Depending upon where you live in the country determines how long you have to get to a shelter, right? So if you're in the down south and the rocket is coming from Hamas, or let's say you're up in the north and the rocket is coming from Hezbollah, you may only have 15 seconds to get to a shelter. That's not a long time. For me, in Tel Aviv, we're fortunate in that we have 90 seconds to get to a safe room. So we basically have to stop everything we're doing and as quickly as possible get to a safe place. You don't want to be around glass. Our public parks have bomb shelters. Our buildings are built with a safe room, or the stairwells are reinforced, and we have to run to that. Now that's, for a smaller rocket that might come from, Hamas or Hezbollah. But as you know, we faced rocket attacks from Iran. There were two separate episodes. Now, when they launched the drones, I think we had a couple of hours, right? We knew they were coming and they were on their way. Some of their missiles are 12, but if they launch a ballistic missile at us, it's coming faster. So depending upon where it is, I mean, those, especially when Iran was launching missiles at us, it was scary. There were several hundred missiles coming. It could have overwhelmed our missile defense system. Thank God for the American and other allies, including France and the UK and others that helped us one of the times. I think the other time we were on our own. But no, we were deep down in the basement when I was raining, because it's one thing if it's, let's say, like a Scud missile. It's something else when it's an Iranian ICBM that can cause a lot of damage, and you're just hoping and praying. Now, the first Iranian attack, one of the missiles hit less than a mile from my house, and we heard it and we felt it. And that was scary.
That must be really disruptive, because, I mean, it also depends what time of the day it happens. You could be in the middle of work doing something very important. It could be like in the middle of night when you're in your pajamas or, having a shower or something, and then you've got 15 seconds, 90 seconds to run to a shelter. So how does it play on you psychologically? Because every day you wake up and you think, any moment I could get a siren, I could get an alert on my app, and I've got a maximum of like 15 seconds, 90 seconds to go to a shelter. Do you just ignore that? How do you live with that? Do you just get on with it? Or
So honestly, I don't wake up wondering when the rocket attack is going to come. You try not to think of it, and you hear the siren go off. Now, it has created a lot of PTSD in our nation. Especially for those that were immediately affected on October 7th, so right down by the Gaza border, let's say, and children. I have friends. They have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old. I mean, it's very, very traumatic for the kids. And to the extent that now sometimes, even if they hear, let's say, an ambulance or a police siren, until they realize where the siren's coming from, there's a panic. Personally, like I said, we're happy every day. We get up, we run our stuff. I don't worry if it's going to come. But you're right. They've come at 4 o'clock in the morning where you're awoke in the middle of the night. And, when I was in the U.S., living in the U.S., I slept in my underwear and I never had to worry about keeping a pair of shorts or a pair of pants next to the bed. But if you share a safe space with someone or you have to go into a shelter, you're probably throwing on some clothes. If you have kids, you have to go get your kids. Mm-hmm. If you have a dog, you may want to go grab your dog. So all that's taking time away from the amount of time you have to go to the shelter. And you're right. There was one time that my wife and I were out for dinner and the siren went off and the people at the restaurant calmly explained to us where we had to go for shelter. There was one time we were just walking down the street coming back from breakfast. The sirens went off and we went, into a supermarket and we stayed in their safe space until we got the all clear. I remember that story vividly because that's what I said to my wife. I think we're really Israeli now because we ducked into the supermarket. We went to the safe room. When we got the all clear, I said to my wife, you know what? We're in the supermarket. We need to pick up a few things. What do we do? So you almost go on with your life as soon as you possibly can. I've been in safe spaces in a restaurant where people pick up their drinks and we're standing, in the safe room and people are drinking their cocktails. Whatever we can do to just go on living is what we try to do. But it's hard. It's hard.
And I think that's one of the crucial differences between Israel and groups like Hamas, because what matters for Israel is the lives of its citizens. So it's built shelters, it's built safe places to protect its citizens. Whereas Hamas hasn't built one shelter for its citizens. They've built tunnels for their own military, but they haven't built one shelter, one safe place to protect their citizens. Because for them, casualties is a weapon. It's something that they can use. And in fact, I've heard one of the Hamas officials say that it's not down to us to make shelters. It should be the United Nations because we're refugees and they should make shelters for us. I mean, if you're governing that place, your first duty should be to protect the lives of your citizens. Would you say?
Absolutely. I mean, not only that, they like using their people as human shields. Mm. But not only are they not building bomb shelters, if you remember when Israel withdrew all its citizens from the Gaza Strip, there are videos where they were literally, the Hamas and the Gazans were literally taking apart the piping that we had built. We had kibbutzim there, and we were watering plants and doing agriculture, and they used those pipes to make rockets. So not only are they not taking funds to build safe rooms, but they're actually destroying things that can add value to their lives to build rockets.
It all boils down to one thing, doesn't it? They love death more than we love life. Would you not say?
Absolutely. Like you said, to them, every time someone dies, it's a criticism of Israel and they think they're victorious. And for us, we've invested, billions of dollars on missile defense systems like Iron Dome and David's Sling and David's Arrow, I think this was called, to save lives, right? And so it's also particularly disturbing when certain members of the U.S. Congress vote against funding for the Iron Dome, which is a defensive system that saves lives. Yeah. I mean, if you vote against the Iron Dome, you're rooting for Israelis to die.
Yes. Yeah, it's as simple as that.
Simple as that.
And there was also a greenhouse, am I correct, when Israel left Gaza, which was very successful. And the Israelis actually left it for the Gazans because they could export flowers and things like that to Europe, and it would have been a source of income, thinking that, if they're sort of financially well off and prosperous, then they'd be less militant. But the first thing they did was they blew up the greenhouse. Is that right?
You're right. They blew up the greenhouses. They pulled the pipes out of the ground. They wanted to, I think they thought they were teaching Israel a lesson not to try to help us. But that should have been the first warning to the people of Gaza that Hamas doesn't care about them. It didn't take a day.
Yeah. But apart from rockets, you also face sporadic terrorist attacks. Now, that's something that we face here as well, or we have faced, but on a much smaller, not much smaller scale, but less frequency. Whereas that happens as well. That could come from the West Bank. That could come from Gaza. It could come from, from anywhere. And that must be worry as well. Every time you get on a bus, every time you just go to the supermarket or something.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's, unfortunately, that's the way of life, right? Now, again, thank God, our security services do a fabulous job in thwarting, a lot of those attacks. But they did happen. You probably heard there was several buses were blown up not too long ago. And yes, there are Hamas cells and Hezbollah cells, and the Iranian regime is constantly recruiting others to commit terrorist attacks. But also, one other thing about Israel is because of the high level of people that serve in the Israeli Defense Forces, there's civilians that carry guns, and sometimes it's the police that stop something in advance, or the security services, and sometimes it has to be a civilian that happens to be armed that stops it. But again, that's another reason that I think that people have a hard time understanding how can we live so happily, because we don't look. If I hadn't made Aliyah, then they win, right? What do they want? They want us to scare us. They want us to leave. They want to take over Israel. From the river to the sea means no more Jews in Israel, right? So that's why they do terror attacks. And so we're not going to let them get their wish. And we're going to keep living in our land, and we're going to keep being happy. And we're going to keep fighting terrorism all around the globe. And I hope your listeners understand that if Israel had fallen, it would have opened a whole nother door to the West. Israel really is the line of defense, not only for free Europe, but a free America as well, because the jihadists would become emboldened. Oh, if we could bring down Israel, then we can bring down whoever. So I think that anyone that cares about their freedoms should be rooting for Israel to defeat this radical Islam.
I think they're already emboldened in one way, seeing this massive support for them across the Western cities and universities and all that. But we'll come back to that later. One of the interesting things I noticed when I went to Israel was that here's a small country surrounded by enemies and forces that want to destroy it. And the security is actually very good, like you say, but it's not a repressive security. You don't feel like when you get to Israel, someone is walking behind your back, as you may do, I imagine, if you go to North Korea, for example. You don't have internet censorship. You don't have ban on satellite dishes. Information is not restricted. And in the middle of Tel Aviv, I remember I could go to shops, and several of them, they were selling T-shirts, Free Palestine. And you could wear a T-shirt saying Free Palestine. It was okay, as long as you didn't harm anyone, And I thought that was really interesting for a country to have such a good security system, but at the same time not to be repressive against its citizens. Because in a despotic country, that sort of environment, hostile environment, would be the perfect justification for the government to restrict freedoms, personal freedoms on its citizens. And yet, Israel is a democracy.
Yeah, it's a democracy. I mean, because when we start going to those forms of censorship, then we're not really living our true values, right? I mean, then it's another way that they've defeated us, right? So we have to, it's a tough balance between security and freedom of expression, everything else you talked about, but you said it properly, right? They could wear their Free Palestine shirt as long as they don't try to harm us.
Yeah.
We just leave us alone and let us live in peace. You could say what you want. There's a big debate right now. We'll come back to what goes on in these college campuses. But you cross a line from free speech to incitement. And as long as you don't cross that line, we have some pretty awful press, I believe, in Israel that says some batshit crazy things. But that's free speech, it's free press, and it's a very important value in our system. And that is really another thing that separates us, not just from radical Islam or countries that censor like North Korea, as you mentioned, but there are some moderate Arab countries that don't even allow the kind of freedom. And there are many people in Israel that say, you know what, perhaps we need be a little bit more like the UAE. I don't know if you remember this, but there was someone in the UAE graduating from college that started screaming Free Palestine. Okay, they threw him out.
Yeah.
They threw him out.
Yeah. But Israel wouldn't do that.
Israel wouldn't do that. We probably should, and a lot of people would agree that they probably should. But that's the value system. It's what we fight for. It's when you join the IDF, it's what you're signing up for in part.
And when we talk about democracy, we're not talking about exclusive democracy just for Jews. The democracy is very inclusive, because I remember I went to the Knesset, for example. There were Arab members there having fiery, conversations and speeches. I remember there was a time where the head of Knesset was an Arab. First night that I was in Israel, I went to a restaurant in Jaffa, and it was an Arab restaurant. It was owned by Arabs, but half the customers were Arabs, half were Jewish. They were dining with each other, talking with each other, joking with each other, sharing food with each other. The Arab Israelis, which I believe is one of the organizations that you work with, and this might be a good opportunity to tell us about that. They enjoy this democracy as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, when people say it's an apartheid nation, right? They're throwing out a word that they have no. First of all, they don't even know what apartheid means. Most of the people that use it. Second of all, they've probably never been to Israel, and if they came, they would actually see the reality. Roughly 20% of Israel's population are Arabs. That could be Muslims, Christians, Druze, Bedouins, and all Israeli citizens have the same rights. They get to vote, they have socialized health insurance, driver's license, whatever right that I have as a Jewish Israeli, they have as an Arab Israeli. And like you said, we've even had a Supreme Court justice that was Arab. The head of the largest bank in Israel, Arab. Members of the IDF, Arab. And, it's interesting.
Some of the best commanders in
Some of the best commanders, but also more of the pharmacists in Israel are Arab than they are Jewish. You go to a hospital and 50-50, 40-60, whether you're being treated by an Arab nurse, a Jewish nurse, it doesn't matter. We all figured out how to live together and have a partnership.
This is one of the things that people in the West that march for Hamas and such organizations out of their sheer ignorance in march in the West for these organizations. They forget that Arabs are just as much victims of the terrorism by Hamas and Hezbollah. And you've got first experience with that yourself, haven't you?
Yeah,
because you worked with some of the Arab Israelis that have been victims.
Absolutely. So first of all, on October 7th, Arabs were killed, Muslims, Christians, Druze, Bedouins. They were held hostage. It wasn't too long ago that one of the Bedouins were released. And some of our greatest heroes, right, on October 7th were Bedouins or Arab members of the community that were protecting and rescuing and helping to save Jews. Again, and something like that, we all come together. There was a really terrible incident, after October 7th, one of the worst days in our country was when a Hezbollah rocket fell in Majdal Shams. Majdal Shams is in northern Israel in the Golan Heights area, and it's a Druze community, predominantly a Druze community. And 12, we call them our 12 angels, 12 children, mostly between the ages of 10 and 16, were slaughtered on a soccer field. 39 others were severely injured. I met a child, his name is Juwan Ibrahim, who was in a hospital for months recovering. And I met his mother, and I promised them, I bring professional athletes. I'm part of an organization, I run an organization called Project Max, where we bring professional athletes from the US to Israel to combat racism and anti-Semitism and intolerance. I brought two professional American football players, Nick Lowery and Tony Richardson, both Hall of Famers with the Kansas City Chiefs, and we took them to Majdal Shams. And we met with parents of 10 of the 12 kids who were murdered that day by Hezbollah. And, it started as a very somber, sad day. I mean, imagine we asked each one of those parents to tell us a story about their kids that were killed. One father, who happened to also be a paramedic, got to the field, saw his child murdered, and immediately began performing CPR on other kids and trying to aid them because he knew that he had lost his child. In the beginning, we only thought that 11 children had been killed, but one child was missing. The rocket hit that child, and the child was pretty much totally decimated, and it was only through some DNA that we found who that was. These were not Jews. These were Druze, Arab Druze kids who were killed by Hezbollah, who is funded by Iran, which lunatics around this city, London, all around the world are marching in support of.
And do you know, sometimes when I go to reports from these pro-Hamas protests in London, and I speak to the protesters, do you know, almost none of them know that when the last time that Hamas actually held an election was. You know, when I say to them that, you think that Hamas represents Gazans, when was the last time they held an election? And they've just no idea.
They had what? They had one election. And you know what? It's no different in the Palestinian Authority and what people call the West Bank. Mm. He ran for an election, and it was supposed to be a 4-year term. What are we in the 17th year of that 4-year term?
For 17 years, the Palestinians have not been able to vote in an election. No Palestinian under the age of 34 years old has ever voted in his life.
And we've probably had, unfortunately in Israel, we've probably had 17 elections in that time, right? And so you talk about where's the democracy. But I also think it tells you something else. You know, people, a lot of these protesters, the innocent Gazans. Which ones? The ones that are holding hostages in their house, does that make them an innocent Gazan? Or the ones who are looking out for terrorists? I mean, just because you're not holding an RPG or an assault rifle doesn't mean you're an innocent Gazan. They voted these people in. They support these people. And you've seen the video starting at like 4 years old. They're sending kids to nursery school to teach them to kill Jews.
And as we've been talking about Arab Israelis, the reason that you're here on this trip to London is because you are involved with an Israeli Arab organization. Tell us what that is and why you were here and what you were doing.
Yeah, the organization is called Together Vouch for Each Other. It was founded by an Arab Israeli, a good friend of mine, Yosef Haddad, who, by the way, was a commander in the Golani Brigade, which means he had Jewish soldiers, right, reporting to him. So again, dispelling this whole apartheid myth. But the purpose of Together Vouch for Each Other is to bring the Arab Israeli society closer to the Jewish society within Israel, to form a strong partnership between our people and strengthen the country, as we were talking about earlier. And so this was our third delegation together. A couple of years ago, we took a group of Arab Israelis to Auschwitz, and we held the first ceremony in Arabic, memorial ceremony on Auschwitz's ground. The following year, we took a delegation to Abu Dhabi and Dubai on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we held a ceremony between the Arab Israelis and our Emirati cousins to commemorate the Holocaust. And this year, Yosef felt it was really important for us to come to London to speak the truth, because when you see what's going on in these protest marches on Saturdays or on college campuses and apartheid, we wanted to, it's one thing when I come, right? I'm an American Israeli Jew, and I come here and I tell people, oh, we all get along, Arabs have full rights, but it's something else when you hear it from an Arab Israeli. So we brought a delegation of 35, and we spoke in the House of Lords. And we talked about the partnership that exists. We talk about the fact of what happened at Majdal Shams and how Arabs have been victims of the war that Hamas started. But we talked about the equality. There were members of our team that were doctors, lawyers, members of the police, members of the IDF. And you have to see the faces on some of the people in the House of Lords where they hear Arab Israelis talk about the reality of what's really going on in Israel. And then we also went to one of these anti-Israel protests, or the pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah protests, to speak the truth so that they could hear from Arab Israelis. And also talk about the stark difference between how they hold a rally and how the Jewish and pro-Israel community here held a rally. You know, the pro-Hamas and pro-Hezbollah rallies, they're wearing, scarves around their mouth, their faces are covered, they're chanting nasty things, Hitler should have finished the job, and F Israel and F the Jews and all of this. And what was beautiful to see about our rally was Arab Israelis, people from throughout London, but also a big part of the Iranian community that loves Israel and supports Israel, came out, and we were all singing and dancing and living and trying to show the stark differences. I think that the Iranian community here that's against the Islamic regime and the Jewish community are very aligned in values and what we believe should exist. And I also thought it was really important that the people here saw the truth about Arab Israelis and how we live. And so it was a really meaningful trip for us. We got a lot of positive comments. I mean, first of all, we helped strengthen the Jewish community here, the pro-Israel community. But I also think the primary goal was to educate people about the truth of what it's like and that there is no apartheid in Israel.
Who was the audience in the House of Lords? Were there any politicians that sort of were alerted about that their preconceived idea was wrong, or anything that you could say that it changed their views?
Well, I could tell you honestly that I was at least disappointed in who turned out. Right, most of the people that turned out were supporters of Israel.
Right.
The others didn't want to hear it. I don't think they wanted to give an audience to Arab Israelis because they knew we would dispel their narrative. People have, it's not just having the preconceived notion. They want to paint a certain picture, whether it's true or not. And when we left, one of the things that we encouraged all the other members is we will come back at any time. And look, I always say that there's a certain percentage of people that no matter what we say or what we do, they're never going to believe us and they're always going to hate us, right? And we have our supporters, and thank God for them and God bless them. But I think there's a large portion in the middle that just don't know. And what we encourage the members of the House of Lords is try to get some more of those people who either have no opinion of Israel, or maybe they're slightly pro-Israel, or even if they're slightly against Israel because, they listen to the BBC or Al Jazeera. Have them come and hear it from the mouth. So we're really looking forward to coming back and telling the story to more people who have an open mind.
Someone who was very influential in my life was my school maths teacher. And one of the advices that he gave me once was always be wary of people that run away from a debate and want to shut down the debate. Because if they had nothing to hide, they'd be happy to have a debate. They'd be happy to have a chat. And this has always been a benchmark with me. When I notice people that just want to shout, label, don't want to get into a debate, don't want to have a dialogue, then I know that there's something wrong with them. They're normally people who have ideologies and they have these preconceived ideas and they want everything to fit in within that framework of their ideology. Anything outside it, they shun away from it. If they've got this preconceived idea that Arabs are all repressed in Israel, if there's an Arab Israeli that says otherwise, they wouldn't want to talk to him.
Yeah, look, I think part of it is they want their own narrative. I think part of it is, unfortunately, we have a generation of people who've been indoctrinated through universities, mostly by funding from Qatar, that want to have their own narrative painted. But, I think it would be really interesting if you took a camera and a microphone down to some of these pro-Hamas rallies and asked them what's the name of the river and what's the name of the sea, how many of them could actually name it? Or ask them to define genocide.
That's been done, actually.
It's done quite. Right. What do we find out? They don't know what river, what sea. They don't even know what they're talking about. Yeah. They're ignorant.
I've actually got an article published in the Spiked Online about the sheer ignorance of people that take part in these protests. And throughout the article, there's links to the videos that I've taken talking to these people where they don't know the very basics of the topic that they're protesting about. And again, Eric, this is something else that I've noticed. I mean, I'm old enough to remember many protests. I mean, I remember the anti-Vietnam War protests. I remember council tax protests. I remember the anti-apartheid movement, which I was part of it when I was younger. Whether you agreed with those protesters or not, they knew about their topic. They knew who Ho Chi Minh was, for example. They understood what they're protesting against, even if you may have disagreed with them, but you couldn't accuse them of not knowing about the topic. But when you talk to these protesters, and unfortunately some of them are academics or students, and you think, well, this is part of the intelligentsia, they should know better what river or what sea they're talking about if they're chanting from the river to the sea, or just the very basic things like, when was the last time Hamas held an election? I was actually talking to one woman on one of these protests. She was a graduate of St. Andrews University. She had an MSc in religious studies, and she had specialized in Arab-Israeli conflict. And she didn't know that Hamas hadn't held an election for 17 years.
Yeah, look, I think part of this is that we're going on about 50 years that Qatar's been funding universities around the world. And that influence is now having an impact, right? If you're a 50-year-old college professor and you were going to school, 25, 30 years ago, you were being indoctrinated back then. So the education system is a big part of it. Social media is a big part of it. People are getting their news from TikTok and Instagram, where a 30-second clip, which may or may not be real, right, is influencing people. And then on top of it, part of it's also AI, right, where you can make a fake photo. I don't know if you saw this picture from Gaza where they showed a cat that had 5 arms and legs because the AI wasn't done well. Or they're using pictures of a child that was killed in Syria during the Syrian war, the Syrian civil war, and someone saying, oh, the IDF, just butchered this child. And people don't know, they don't care. They see this little clip and they believe the nonsense. And it's really scary. I think we've raised a generation of morons.
Incidentally, you mentioned the media. Did the media cover, or mainstream media, cover any of your events when you were in London? The House of Lords meeting or the events at the LSE?
So I haven't seen anything more. I've seen 2 things. Number one, the Jewish Chronicle did cover it here.
You'd expect them to.
You would expect them to. But the New York Post actually covered the article.
Any other British media?
I haven't seen any other British media.
Did you ask them to come and cover it?
I didn't specifically ask them to come. No, but I think there's also a bias. I mean, we weren't going to get the BBC to show up, right?
Well,
I could have sent a limo for them, and they weren't going to come. They don't care about the truth. Sorry, sorry.
This is it. So we're really facing a very powerful enemy, an enemy that is very ideologically motivated, loves death more than life, is well funded, Qataris, and has managed to infiltrate academia and also the mainstream media. What do we do? How do we fight this?
Well, look, one of the other messages that we tried to explain as Together Vouch for Each Other and the Arab Israelis and Yosef Haddad was, listen to us. Listen to Arab Israelis about what the truth is and what's coming next. I don't know why and it's not just unique to Britain. You look at France or Brussels or some other countries where they've put on these blinders. Number one, there is a reason that the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt, and even Russia have declared the Muslim Brotherhood a foreign terrorist organization. Perhaps other countries need to designate the Muslim Brotherhood a foreign terrorist organization.
Of course, you're referring to UK.
Yes, the UK as well.
Yeah.
I think that, you need to clamp down on who you allow to enter this country. Same issue in the United States and others, the immigration. You're not getting a flood of people that are coming from the UAE. Why? They're happy with their lives there. They're moderates. So I think you need to take that. I think that all countries should ban foreign funding of their universities. I mean, those 3 steps do not involve any sort of weapons, right? And that's how we're going to begin to push back.
So to do that, we have to waken up the silent majority to bring pressure on the elected representatives, the politicians, to change the policy. But my experience, Eric, is that, I talk to a lot of the British politicians, MPs, and that, they always agree with you. I've never known one to disagree with them. They're always nodding their head. But when it comes to actually doing something about it, none of them want to be the one to push the button, because pushing the button has consequences. I mean, we had the former Justice Minister resign because of intimidation against himself, against his family, the threats against his constituency of things. So if the Minister of Justice feels too threatened, too intimidated, too scared to continue and resigns, what chance is there for the rest of us? But at the end of the day, it's not just our future; it's the future of our children. And we can't remain silent majority, because if we remain silent majority, we're going to lose.
Yeah, look, you have to. We're in a war.
Yeah.
We're in an ideological war, and like you said, if you're not fighting for yourself, we're close the same age. I don't know how much longer I have, but I have a 30-year-old son. I'm fighting for him and my future grandchildren, that they should be allowed to live however they want to live. They want to grow up and be proud Jews. Great. They don't want, but they should have the choice, right? They should have the choice to live their life as they want. And I think that is going to be taken away here. And if people wait too long to wake up, it's really going to be too late. And, they say first they come for the Saturday people, then they come for the Sunday people. And I know you've heard the West is next. I mean, look what the Iranian regime and all of their puppets around the world, they have a clear message of what they're trying to do. And why do people in Britain or France or Brussels or anywhere else think that they're not looking at them too? They're looking to create their caliphate.
So, I mean, we've had a great chat. It's been fantastic talking to you. I could talk to you for hours. Let's finish on a positive note. What's your next project, and what do you take back as a hopeful sign from your trip to Britain?
Well, look, I think that the hopeful sign were the members of the House of Lords that showed up. It was seeing the crowd that evening where I had heard from many people here that it was the first time the crowd of pro-Israel and Jewish supporters was larger. Okay, that's a big deal, right? When we start outnumbering them, we're showing our strengths. So that's a positive sign. Sitting down here with you, thank you very much, is really important to get the word out. Look, we want to come back. What's next for me? We have plans to bring many professional athletes from the United States to Israel, in part to show the truth. People like to focus on our differences. I prefer to focus on our similarities. Most of the athletes that come from the U.S. to Israel are not Jewish. But if they're Christian, we have shared roots, right? Jesus was a Jew that came from the land of Israel, right? And when people are there, or like when you visit and you saw Arabs and Jews all getting along. I brought delegations of basketball players to Israel, and I always invite a Palestinian friend of mine who plays in the Israeli Premier League to come meet them. And it's interesting, like an athlete say, but Eric, how'd she get here? What do you mean how she got here? She got on the bus and she drove from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. And their minds are blown. So I think one of the best ways to see the truth is to come to Israel and experience what you were fortunate enough to experience. And people might say, well, I want to wait for the war to be over. You're safe coming to Israel now. I had two friends of mine I mentioned, Nick Lowery and Tony Richardson, were there in Israel. While they were there, we had an attack from the Houthis. Tony was in his bed, got woken up, went to the safe room, and afterwards he was hungry. He said, I don't know if room service is going to deliver. There was just a rocket attack. He picked up the phone. He said within 20 minutes, they delivered food. The guy was nice. Do you need anything? Tony went to sleep. And when he woke up in the morning, the first thing he did was open the curtains. And what he was afraid of, which is probably what most Brits would happen, or most Americans, if there was a rocket attack on New York, the streets would not be lined the next morning, right? People would not be out in Hyde Park. But he opened up the curtains and he saw about 60 or 70 people surfing. He saw people jogging on the boardwalk. He saw people walking their dogs. And he said, I teared up. He's like, this country is so resilient and so happy. You don't let anything break you. And he said, I really realized then just how special Israel is. So I'll tell you, you're far safer in Israel than you are here. When we went to the protest that Wednesday night, we probably had 40 police officers that had to escort us out of the campus and to a safe place. You don't need that in Israel. So yes, we talked about rocket attacks and everything else, but I will tell you, you go to the shelter for 10 minutes, you come out between the Iron Dome and everything else, you're safe, and come see what life is like in Israel, and come see the truth for yourself. The best education is to come visit.
We live for life.
We live for life.
Well, that's a good positive note to finish the conversation on. Thank you very much for Eric. I know you've got a busy schedule.
Thanks for having me.
I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks for watching this. You've heard what Eric has had to say. So as usual, it's up to you to decide, because you decide in these podcasts.